Hello everyone, I'm Katra. I've been playing Honkai Star Rail since a week after it came out, so pretty much since day one. I'm making reviews for every gacha game I'm playing, so now that Genshin review is done, I've decided to do a review for Star Rail. It seems like a good time to look back at the game, now that Amphorio's story is close to its ending. I don't like repeating myself, but in case you're new, reviews here are split into two videos, one where I hate on the game, and one where I try to be positive. This is the one where I talk about everything I dislike about the game. And just like Genshin, there's quite a few things to talk about here, so you might wanna get seated. Anyway, without further ado, here's everything I hate about Honkai Star Rail as of version 3.6. It's hard to talk about Star Rail's story because it's such a mixed bag of qualities, and the storytelling for every region is so different. I prefer criticizing more general aspects of the story on these videos, but I feel like unless I separate each region on the game here, it's going to be impossible to fully review. For starters, I'll say that I don't really have anything bad to say about Belobog, so let's move on to the Luofu. Before I even talk about the Luofu, I have to mention that to write the script, I needed to skim through a playthrough of it, because I straight up could not remember any of it. The story is not good enough to be remembered, and it's also not bad enough to be funny. It's just in a really sad middle spot. The only somewhat memorable spots are the cutscenes, and even then they're easily the worst in the game. The story is drowned in a lot of exposition that serves no purpose and pointless dialogues, not to mention plenty of puzzles and combat just to fill out an otherwise short story. All these issues make the Luofu story feel way longer than it actually is. It is roughly the same length as Belobog, but if you told that to a Star Rail player, they wouldn't believe you. Also, if you know me, you know I prefer when a quest focuses on characters rather than on the actual story or lore. Well, the characters in Luofu are just not good. And the quest also doesn't make an effort to delve deep into any of them. Compare that to Belobog with its clear focus on Bronya and Seal, and it's not hard to see why the Luofu just falls short in this aspect. Lastly, I want to mention that the quest might have gotten a better score from me if I did this review before Penacony. Unfortunately, this review comes after Hoyoverse decided that they could not keep a 4-star character dead, and ruined what was possibly the only surprising part about the entire Luofu storyline. I really wish I could say more about the story, but the whole 9 hours that this quest lasts are just a bunch of nothing. Okay, now we move on to Penacony, and I have a lot more stuff to say about this place, because at least there's some stuff going on here. And while it does do a few things right, it also does a lot of things wrong. The biggest issue in my opinion with Penacony is just how confusing it can be. Any story about dreams is already at a disadvantage, because it can be hard to tell if you're in reality in a dream, or in a dream inside of a dream. But the worst part here is what makes this story really confusing is that every single character speaks in riddles. Sunday, Acheron, Welt, Aventurin, Ratio, Black Swan, Gallagher, they all talk and act in such a cryptic way that you can never tell exactly what's going on. The actual story itself of what happens in Penacony from 2.0 to 2.2, you can somewhat easily sum up and understand that it's not bad at all. But the way it's written is just not it. Just like the Luofu, there's also quite a bit of filler here. Continuing with the theme of doing things half right, the story does have a bigger focus on characters instead of lore, but it doesn't fully commit to it. You can clearly see that 2.0 is focused on Firefly, 2.1 on Aventurin, and 2.2 on Acheron. But the game doesn't go all in. In 2.0 you can clearly see the moment where the quest goes from date with Firefly to story focus. It's a really hard noticeable cutoff that doesn't really make the quest seem cohesive. In 2.1 they did it a bit better with Aventurin, but to be honest, I don't really like having to hop between POVs so often. It's just another thing that makes an already confusing story even more convoluted. And the same can be said of 2.2. You'll be in a story moment that has nothing to do with Acheron, and then get hit with an Acheron flashback out of nowhere. And speaking of Acheron, that's the last thing I want to mention here. Nowhere in the game does it say that you should play Honkai Impact 3 before this one, and yet in Penacony, there's a conversation between Acheron and Welt that's filled with references to it. Either tell me to play the game, or just don't put this in. And this one's not even the biggest offender. That goes to the moment where Acheron says her true name. Luckily for me, I know a tiny bit about Honkai 3rd, so the moment wasn't totally ruined, but for someone who doesn't know anything about it, that moment would mean nothing to them. I want to emphasize that I don't dislike the quest, I'll talk more about what I like about it in my next video, but there's many things about it that could have been handled way better. Honestly, I've got nothing too bad to say about Amphorio's. Yes, the story isn't perfect, but it is so much better than the other regions that it's hard for me to find something to criticize. The quests are a lot more lengthy, and yet I don't think there's much filler or unnecessary dialogue. Maybe in 3.0 there was a bit too much gameplay, but the other versions so far haven't had this issue. And while at the start it was a bit confusing, 3.4 helped a lot with explaining very clearly everything that had happened. Honestly, the worst thing I can say about Amphorius right now is that I'm worried that the final version might flop because 3.4 was just so good. I'll talk more about it in my next video. Finally, I initially didn't want to talk about the intermission quests because I wouldn't really consider them to be part of the main story, but the monkey quest in Penacony is so horrible that I'm forced to talk about it. When I tell you that the quest is just 5 hours of dumb monkey noises, I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. They tried to make a funny quest with serious elements and they failed miserably. The serious elements get drowned out by how bad the rest of the quest is. And it also fails at being funny. I don't even understand how they managed to fail this hard. The intermission quest with Sushang, Huo and Ginai Fen has a very similar structure, except that one works really well and might be one of the best quests in the game. This, on the other hand, has pretty much nothing salvageable. It tries to give character development to Robin and Boothill and also make Rappa a somewhat likable character by giving her a sad backstory, but it tries to do so near the end of the quest, when I've already had to suffer through 3 hours of the worst dialogue ever conceived in a video game. I am so glad that with Amphorius they decided to extend the main story, and I hope they do it again for the next planets, so we don't get any more of these dumb filler quests. The gameplay of Star Rail is nothing special, it's just your average turn-based RPG combat, except you only have like 3 buttons to press on every character. If you look at any other turn-based RPG, by late game you usually have at the very least 10 different buttons you can press, whether they are spells, skills, orders, etc. Star Rail is really bare bones in comparison, and yet I cannot bring myself to say that the game is skillless. For the longest time I thought it was, because basic logic tells you that there's no way there can be any skill gap in a game with 3 buttons where you pretty much always want to press 2 of them as soon as they're available. Do I wanna know how I found out about this? I always play on automatic, and one day I decided to play on manual to see if there was any difference, and boy oh boy, there sure is a difference. But this is the video about everything I hate, so instead of praising the game for requiring a bit of skill, I will now proceed to insult the sorry excuse of an automatic combat this game has. Like I said, the game has only 3 buttons, but somehow the AI is so incredibly bad that it manages to screw it up every single time. I can't tell you everything that the AI does wrong, because like most players, I don't look at the screen while the auto does its thing. I just see that I can get much more points on pure fiction and way less cycles on Memory of Chaos if I play manually. I can give you an example that I did specifically check though, and that is the interaction between Seridra and Finon. Seridra's whole kit revolves around duplicating skills when her counter reaches 6. And Finon's strongest skill is the Big Meteor. You want to duplicate 2 meteors per every ultimate you use on Finon. To do that, you simply need to do an extra basic attack before the last meteor. So Seridra's passive gets its final stack and the meteor gets duplicated. Simple enough, right? Well, the AI is incapable of doing this. When it sees that it can use a meteor, it just throws it out, completely disregarding Seridra's kit and making her less useful than Bronya and Ruan-Mei in autoplay. Again, this is just the example I've tested the most and that I'm most familiar about, but there's plenty more issues with the combat AI. Here's a few quick examples without going into too much depth. With Finon, you want to hold off on the ultimate until you get as many buffs as possible. With Cypher, you also want to hold off on the ultimate until you have X amount of stacks. With Bronya, you sometimes want to auto-attack for the action advance. With Gallagher, you want to ult as soon as possible when playing Castoris. In Big Herta teams, you always want to have spill coins for her, etc. These are all things that the auto mode completely ignores and that have a massive impact on the gameplay. Don't get me wrong though, I do like that there's a skill gapping in the game between playing manually and with the auto mode. But when I can get 0 cycles manually and the AI can barely get 3 cycles, then there's something very, very wrong with the AI. Like I said, the game has 3 buttons. It cannot be this hard to improve the auto mode to make it more on par with an actual player. Or even better, instead of writing a bunch of code that we can't see, how about giving us the tools to customize the AI ourselves? Here's a screenshot of the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII. For every party member, you can write a series of conditional statements, just like coding, that determine what the character does in combat. This game came out in 2006 for the PlayStation 2, and the characters there have way more actions than the ones in Star Rail. Hoyoverse has no excuses here. If Final Fantasy XII could do it 20 years ago, then they can do it too. Either improve the auto mode massively so it's almost on par with manual, or give us the tools to customize it ourselves. One thing that's pretty annoying about the combat is the RNG involved. First you got crits, which are in most games nowadays, so sure, no problem. But you also have enemy AI RNG. because characters that get hit regenerate energy, and some characters rely on getting hit to achieve their proper rotations. Not to mention that some enemies can delay with their attacks, and some characters really don't like being delayed. If you're playing sustainless, then on top of that you have to pray that the damage is spread out enough that no party member dies. And then you also have bounce skills, which, to be fair, this only affects final nowadays, but there may be more characters in the future with them. If you're using characters that apply debuffs and your effect hit rate isn't sky high, then that's another layer of RNG. Same with Lycons that apply debuffs with a set chance. And some characters have, or used to have, random mechanics in their kits. Silverwolf's E used to be random, and luckily it's not anymore, but Cinque's whole kit and Aventurine's passive still add more layers of randomness. It might not look like there's much variance, but there's enough that it can sometimes take quite a few resets to complete the endgame modes, and it's pretty obnoxious when you're forced to reset because you get screwed by RNG. I know many people like speed tuning and say it gives a lot of skill expression to the game, but I cannot bring myself to like it. Skill expression should be reserved to the actual combats, not what I do outside of them. I don't find it fun how 90% of how an endgame fight goes is decided by the funny speed numbers I can achieve on the 4 characters on my team. Maybe if they weren't decided by RNG, I would find the mechanic better, but having to speed tune 3 or 4 characters in a team is obnoxious. In the Trails games you also have speed, except there you only care about having it as high as possible. Here, because of how Memory of Chaos works with its cycles, you want really specific speed numbers in order to make the most of your team. And the difference between having and not having those is massive. And what also sucks is that the speed works with decimals internally, but the game doesn't let you see decimals, it only shows you whole numbers. Which means that sometimes you'll keep a relic thinking, alright, this should get me to the desired speed, only to go 1 point higher because the relic had some hidden decimals. It also sucks that some relic sets give percentage speed increases, because it totally screws with you when counting the speed you get from relics, and you run into the same issue I mentioned above with the decimals. And then you also have light coins and relic sets that give you action advance, which you also need to take into account when speed tuning. Anyway, I think you get my point by now. I understand that this is a turn-based game, so team building needs to matter, but when I have to spend so much more time inside the character menu compared to the time I spend in an actual combat, it just feels really bad. One thing about the combat is that I feel the longer the game goes on, the more we don't care about mechanics because we can just brute force them. In the early days, it was very important to bring the correct element characters to a fight, because that lower elemental resistance mattered a lot. Breaking the enemies also mattered a lot more. The break damage you got was a way bigger percentage of your total damage than it is nowadays. These mechanics were great because they encouraged the player to use different characters and to experiment with their builds. A lot more characters used to be built focusing on break, with some using hybrid crit break builds. And sometimes you would play characters that you wouldn't normally use because they had a favorable matchup. Okay, this last one might be a bit too exaggerated, but you get my point anyway. For the last few versions, what most people do is that you just have 2 teams, and you use them to brute force every single endgame content. You don't even look at the enemy elements, and you don't care about break. And in my opinion, this makes the game worse, even if it is probably better for a free-to-play player. And this is just me mentioning 2 of the big mechanics the game has. Every single boss in the game has some sort of gimmick nowadays, and 90% of those can just be safely ignored. I'm really hoping for the next planet, whatever new mechanics they introduce, if they add any, actually make a difference and force players to use their brains instead of throwing their best team at everything. And if they don't want to make new mechanics, they should at least make break more important. The elements can't really be made important again, unfortunately, not when there's so many characters now that either add weaknesses to enemies or reduce their elemental resistances. The biggest issue we have to mention about the characters is that I really don't like the direction they're taking with the kit designs. It seems very clear to me that when designing characters nowadays, they always do so with a specific team in mind, and they don't try to make characters fit multiple teams or be versatile. If you look at the characters from 3.0 until Cypher, yeah, they all have teams where they work better, but most of them can be used in a variety of teams. The Remembrance Trailblazer, Trivi, Hyacinth, and Cypher are all great characters that can fit many teams. And Axa and Mayday are also fine because you can use them as sub-DPS or main DPS. But more and more since 3.0, and especially after Cypher's release, you notice that a few characters just straight up don't work or lose out on a lot of damage if you don't use them with specific characters. Aglaya is just straight up unplayable without Sunday and Ho-Ho. If you play Castoris without Hyacinth and her light cone, you lose out on like a billion damage, and it will only get worse with Evernight's release. Saber also loses out without Sunday and Ho-Ho, just like Aglaya. And then we have the worst offender here, Seridra, whose kit is a complete failure. It was tailor-made to only work with Finon, but it turned out that it also worked extremely well with Raxa, one of the best DPS in the game. So throughout the beta, Hoyoverse just straight up did not know what to do. Because they wanted to have a support for Finon, but they didn't want to buff Anaxa too much. They fumbled around with the mechanics and the numbers, and what we got is a character that only works with Finon and Anaxa, and it's barely an upgrade for them. Now, you might say that I'm exaggerating here, and that of the characters I mentioned, only Sridhara is truly poorly designed and not versatile. And while I do agree to some extent, it's hard not to see the writing on the wall here, especially when you look at Genshin and see that there's also signs of the same there. I will say that I've played gacha games with characters that were even more restrictive, with passive abilities that straight up said only works with X character. But the thing is that this worked in those games, because you could pull for the full team without going poor. Characters in Star Rail are way too expensive for you to pull a full team of 4 premium characters, and that's not even mentioning the light cones. They need to stop going down this path and start making characters that aren't locked to one team again. Speaking of writings on the wall, I'm not a fan of Castori's global passive. I feel like everyone has stopped talking about this because it's already been a few patches and they haven't added another one, but I'm still scared about it. And I also think people have severely underestimated the power of that global passive. On release, everyone was saying that it was totally irrelevant, but I cannot tell you the amount of times I've been saved by it. It's more than I can count. It has saved me on teams with a healer against bosses that do a lot of damage, but that's not the problem. The problem is that this passive totally enables you to get away with playing sustainless way more often than you should be. My main team right now is fine on sustainless, and I'm telling you, it would not work half as well without Castorius' global passive. It is the first of its kind in the game, and it's not like a cool detail, it's not only visual, it's not even a tiny buff. It's a massive effect, in my opinion, and I don't like the precedent this sets moving forward. Another big issue with the characters is that more and more lately, it feels like they're straight up taking parts of the character's kit and putting them into Eidolons or even light cones. I feel like Eidolons should just be stat upgrades to the character, or maybe cool effects, but hiding whole new playstyles and teams behind Eidolons seems really bad for the player. Hyacinth's light cone drains health from the entire team, Seridra's E1 gives one more core flame to Finon, Acheron's E2 removes part of Annihility teammate restriction, Aglaya's E1 doesn't change her best in slot team, but it makes her way more flexible. Finon's E1 enables him in Pure Fiction. Okay, truth be told, even though I believe most of these are valid examples, this section is just so I can complain about Hyacinth's light cone. The other examples I can find justification for if I try really hard and go through a few mental hoops, but Hyacinth's light cone just should not exist. That's not a buff on the light cone, that's a whole new mechanic. That's just literally part of Jingliu's kit shoved into a weapon, and it should have been part of Hyacinth's kit. And I really hope that this is just a one-time issue, and that they won't release more light guns or dupes that are just straight up a part of characters' abilities. I'll also say that I think they could do a better job with path and element variety. We have 4 5-star characters that are Physical Destruction, 2 Nihility Quantums, 2 Wind Harmony, etc. It might not seem like there's much repetition, but you have to remember that there's a few combinations that still have 0 characters, even counting 4 stars. We still don't have Lightning or Wind Preservation characters, and we don't have Ice Abundance either. And if we exclude 4 stars, then the number of unused combination goes up. Considering that it's already been 2 years, and that we know the next 2 characters are both Ice Remembrance, I'd say this is a problem. If you play Star Rail, you already know the first issue I'm going to mention here. Yes, the issue has been quote-unquote fixed in the latest versions, but no, that doesn't mean they're off the hook yet. I'm obviously talking about the famous black screens, where a text explains what is happening instead of the game actually showing you what's going on. There's only one good reason this should ever be used: if a character needs to explain something to another character that the player has already heard about. That's it. If you use one of these black screens in any other context, then it's to the detriment of the presentation. And boy oh boy does Hoyoverse love throwing this at you at any time they are able to. I don't think that I need to explain in too much detail what makes this bad. It's obviously better to show what's happening rather than telling it. If this were on any other game, I might tolerate them more, but we're talking about a Hoyoverse game. They make billions in earnings every single year. They have no excuses here. They clearly have the resources to avoid this. And no, the issue isn't fixed yet. They have been avoiding this for the latest story quests, but we can't say the issue is fixed if there's still 2 years worth of story quests filled with black screens. Any player starting the game today will run into all of this. They need to go back and update all of them for me to say that this issue is definitively fixed. Honestly, there's not much more to criticize about Star Rail's presentation, but I will say that the dialogues still feel pretty stiff. They are a tiny bit better now compared to the start of the game, I guess, but there's still much more that can be improved here. It's not just a matter of adding more animations and movement, they also need to update their camera game. Characters in dialogues right now just turn their heads to whoever they're talking to, and sometimes they might play a short animation. This is nothing great, but I don't think it deserves to be complained about as much as the camera work. They just use cuts. It's like their camera cannot be moved unless it is teleported directly to the position. A character talks, the camera points to them, and when the next character talks, the camera just teleports to their face. Again, I'm not asking for every dialogue to be a cinematographic experience, but come on, I know you can do much better than this. This section is going to be really similar to the one from my Genshin video, because their gacha mechanics are pretty much the same. So I'll just give the short version here. And just like there, I also consider the endgame and events to be part of the gacha system, so I'll talk about those too. But anyway, first let's talk about the actual pulling mechanics. The 50-50 PT is unacceptable, and so is a soft PT. The whole point of a PT system is to guarantee that the player gets the character they want in a set amount of pulls. This version that Star Rail has doesn't do that, so honestly I don't know why we even call it a PT system here. On top of that, you also can pull for every character's weapon. While the PT here is a lot better than Genshin with a 75% chance to get the featured weapon, I don't want to say that the system as a whole is better, because the weapons in Star Rail are way bigger upgrades than the ones in Genshin, meaning you're forced to pull for the weapons a lot more often than in Genshin. And speaking of weapons, there's one thing I want to mention here that happens in both in Genshin and Star Rail, but is only a problem here in my opinion. And it's that getting specific 4-star weapons is incredibly hard, even if you pull in the weapons banner. In Genshin it's barely an issue because not very many 4-star gacha weapons are that good. But in Star Rail, you have Lucca's weapon and Dance Dance Dance. These two light guns are straight up best in slot or close to it for some characters, especially DDD. The difference between having this or not is like night and day, and the issue is that whether you have them or not is mostly out of your control. I am lucky enough to have multiple copies of both, but I have a friend who has been playing since day one and he doesn't have a single Lucca light gun. Would it be so hard to give us some sort of PT for 4-star characters and light guns, or add them to the shop? If there's 5-star weapons in the shop, then I don't see why we also can't have 4-star weapons there. Another issue here is the power creep. Now, if you've watched my Genshin video, you might say I'm a hypocrite, because in that video I said that Genshin lacked power creep. But both things I'm saying here can be true, and I think they are. In my opinion, while Genshin has too little power creep, Star Rail has a bit too much of it. It's not a massive issue like it was for Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. In that game, units became irrelevant after like a month, but it's still pretty bad here. My E1 Firefly has been sitting in the bench for like the last 5 versions, and she's not that old of a character. I really think Hoyoverse needs to take a good look at how they're handling power creep in both of these games, and see if they can find a result that lies somewhere in the middle of the two. Now let's move on to the endgame. And the endgame has a very clear issue, and it's that right now there's no reason for all 3 modes to exist. In Genshin, the 3 endgame modes are at least somewhat different, rewarding either vertical or horizontal investment. Here in Star Rail, they used to be different, but with each version they are becoming more and more similar. Pure Fiction used to be AoE focused, but now there's always a big guy. An Apocalyptic Shadow used to be focused on break, but now it's just pretty much the same as Memory of Chaos, where you just bring your strongest teams. And all 3 modes have the same goal, defeat all the enemies as fast as possible. Pure Fiction needs to go back to being AoE focused, and Hoyoverse needs to look at Apocalyptic Shadow and find a way to make it feel different from Memory of Chaos. The second issue with the endgame is how much it caters to the latest characters. I already mentioned this when talking about Genshin, but honestly it might be even worse here. Not only do they have bosses cater to certain characters, but they will also make the smaller enemies weak to the current character's element. And on top of that, they also have massive buffs on all 3 endgame modes tailor-made to work only with the latest unit. Again, I can understand wanting to make the new shiny unit look better, but when a character can shift 2 whole tiers on the tier list depending on the buffs and enemies present in the endgame modes, then there's something very wrong here. I also mentioned this complaint on my Genshin video, except it's somehow even worse here. There's a massive lack of skins in the game. We only have 2 skins after more than 2 years. I don't care if they're free or not, I don't care if they have special effects, but I want more skins. And their excuse that they don't want to release skins because of their reputation does not work anymore. We already know that they're going to add gacha skins to their UGC in Genshin. You have so many characters here that will look amazing in different outfits. Literally every other gacha game in existence has skins. There's no reason to have them here. As for the events, we have quite a mixed bag here, and I don't know how to feel about them. There's some really good highs, like the ghost hunting event and the Pokemon event. And then you have ones that are just there, I guess. Like the Clocky movie event and the Origami Bird event, which, by the way, that last one has already been done twice. It's true that the first 2 events were the main focus of their respective versions, and I assume they put more effort into them because of it. But come on, that doesn't mean the events that aren't the focus of a version should be bad. And it's not really a matter of gameplay. I'd say the difference between this is mostly in the writing. All 4 events try to be funny, but only the first 2 I mentioned succeed at it. And while we're talking about events, I want to quickly go over the Fate event, because in my opinion it was extremely disappointing. I don't want to criticize it too much because, hey, at least Starrail had a collaboration event, unlike Genshin, but it is such a bad story I can't help myself. They announced a collaboration a year before it was released. In 1 whole year, they couldn't even make a model for caster, and the event is the same length or shorter than the usual big events. But these issues pale in comparison to how bad the story is. Listen, I love character interactions, and this quest is filled with them, but I cannot bring myself to like it when half of the quest is the worst character in the game, Scott, doing stupid shit that nobody cares about, and the other half is a soft story for an NPC that I do not care in the slightest for. And don't get me started on Oh Look, we're in Britain. For such an awaited event, they really dropped the ball on this one, and I really hope that they do a lot better for future collaborations. This is the section where I very quickly go over all the other issues that I have with the game that can't really be grouped into any category. Most of these aren't big issues, but they should be fixed anyway, because there's a few that are pretty obnoxious. Anyway, let's start. 1. Please let me drag my mouse to select multiple artifacts. Having to click on every single artifact to delete it is really annoying. 2. There should be a button to close the game directly instead of having to go through the intro screen. If Genshin has one, then we can have one here too. 3. Every other gacha game in existence with auto-combat lets you tell the game to keep running a domain until you run out of stamina. Why can't we do that here? 4. When Remembrance released, they made the decision to not give out any good light cones, which made it so if you wanted to pull for Aglaya or Castoris, you were pretty much forced into also pulling for their light cone because the other options were atrocious. I really hope the next path to be released is handled better than this. 5. Please add a button to either skip blessings or choose a random one automatically in the simulated universe. With Acheron and Phynon, this game mode could be done so fast if it wasn't for the fact that you need to click 2 times on a menu for every single enemy you kill. 6. The chest finder needs to be improved dramatically. Only being able to show one chest and only in Amphorius is awful. This is not a game with a focus on exploration. I think they should just show all chests on the map directly. 7. Don't make me use my techniques again when I reset an endgame mode. It's just a loss of time. Put me back inside the combat directly again. 8. I don't understand the aversion that Hoyoverse has to adding animations when pulling a character. They now add animations when you start the game to promote the character but they somehow can't add animations when you pull them? Come on. 9. I like that they have started buffing characters, but I don't like how they've skipped the standard mana characters and that they don't seem to be respecting the release order. If you're going to buff old characters, then buff the ones that are actually old and bad. Yanqing, Pailu, Gepard, and Himeko and Weld needed buffs way more than Kafka and the other characters that got buffed. 10. They really need to start releasing more 4-star characters. Our last 4-star character was Moze over a year ago. Every time we get an event where you can choose a free 4-star, it just doesn't matter at all. Because even as a free-to-play player, I already have every single important 4-star at T6. I know that they're scared of another Gallagher situation, but come on, it's not that hard. 11. The faster sprint that you get in Amphorius by breaking the peak statues should just be the default speed. I don't understand why Hoyoverse can't just let us go faster all the time. The default running speed is really slow currently. 12. There's many times where a quest will tell you to walk 5 meters forward to get another cutscene, but for some reason they decide to throw at you 10 voice lines which get completely skipped after you walk those 5 meters. They should really try to match the amount of voice lines to the distance walked. 13. It's getting pretty annoying how they keep recycling areas instead of creating new ones. They reused the space station for Rappa's quests and a few others. They reused Aedes Lycei for the Fate collaboration. If Genshin can create whole new areas for a single quest, then Starrail should do the same. 14. This is more of a nitpick than anything, but I don't like how the Eagle artifact strike is so broken, you end up using it on a bunch of characters that aren't wind element. It feels very wrong. 15. I can understand that some BAs were missing on a few quests when there was a strike going on, because they couldn't change them. But there's literally no reason that can justify why Saber and Archer don't have English voices on release. And they didn't even bother to put the Japanese lines in the English stuff, which would have made sense. They forced you to change the entire game to another language if we wanted to hear them. 16. I didn't complain about the lack of artifact loadouts in Genshin because I don't think they're that important there. But here, I really do feel their absence. Mainly because of speed. Having to manually speed tune a character when I want to use them on a different team is really annoying. Just let us save loadouts. 17. Why do some story battles remove the auto function? I can kinda understand it in the sense that they want us to pay attention, but come on, you don't need to disable auto. If I'm playing a story quest, it's because I can pay attention to the screen. Don't make me press the buttons. 18. I feel like Star Rail is a lot more aggressive with monetization than Genshin. Not all the time, but during big events like the anniversary, Star Rail seems to shovel the sales and bundles down our throats way harder than Genshin. It's not as bad as many other gacha games, but the difference between the two is quite noticeable. Alright, that's everything I hate about Star Rail. Not as many things here compared to Genshin, but you also have to consider that Genshin released way earlier, so I had way more things to talk about there. I'll also say that if I wrote this script before Amphorios, it would have been way longer, because there was more to complain about back then. I really like the direction the game has been going in since the release of version 3.0. While those early Amphorios patches weren't amazing, it was very clear that the writing was taking a turn for the better. Which is why I don't have as much stuff to say in this video. There's probably also stuff I've forgotten about, though the game isn't that big, it's still large enough that I can miss stuff. I don't know how long the next video will be, but just like with Genshin, I can tell you that I like the game more than I dislike it. I mean, if I didn't, then I wouldn't be playing it. Though to be honest, if my friends weren't playing the game, I'm not so sure I would be playing it myself. To me, the game just sits in a weird spot. I'm not a big fan of the gameplay, and I wasn't a big fan of the story until 3.4. But the story on that patch was so good that it has motivated me to look past all the issues and keep playing. And it's why I found it hard while writing the script to be as harsh as I was on the Genshin video. The criticisms here are also very shallow, but I really don't think delving deep would help in a meaningful way for different reasons. Here's why I didn't talk more about Penacony. Because if you just make the dialogue less confusing and focus more on the characters, the quest would be 90% of the way towards being a great story. And I don't think it's worth it for me to talk about the remaining 10%. First, because it's a lot of minute details that would take way too long to think about and explain. And second, because I don't think it needs to be great. This might be a hot take, but I play gacha games for the characters and the gacha. I don't expect every gacha game I play to have a story that's a masterpiece, I just want them to not suck. I feel like nowadays, everyone wants their favorite gacha game to have a story on par with the greatest. And I really don't think these are healthy expectations to have. These games are made with the sole focus of draining your wallet, and it seems like people have forgotten about this fact. In the Luofu, I also didn't delve deep at all. First, because to do so I would have to rewatch the entire quest, and I don't want to lose 9 hours of my life again. Second, because I don't care about that quest at all, and therefore have no reason to talk about ways to improve it. And third, because I believe that quest would need to be rewritten from scratch to have a chance of being good, and therefore talking about the minor details doesn't help at all. Lastly, because to be honest, like I said on my first video, I still struggle a bit with pinpointing what's good or bad about the story. I just checked a few posts of people talking about the quest, and their explanations are way better, even if we agree on what's wrong about it. I wrote that the characters are not good, and this post said that there's a lack of emotional connection, which is similar to what I wanted to say, except 100 times better written. Oh well, I'm not going to change the script now, too late for that. I hope that if I keep making these videos, I'll get better at it, but to be fair, I think once I start talking about games I care about more, the scripts will also get better. Because, yeah, I don't really care too much about gacha games, for the reason I mentioned above. And I feel like people need to start doing the same here. Discussions of the big gacha games on social media always devolve into an all-out war because people are clearly too invested into the games. Here's my last advice to close out the video. If you want to get attached to a game, maybe you should do it to a game that doesn't exist just to take your money. And with that, I take my leave. See you next time.